Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the webinar with regard to best practice in managing client complaints. We're joined this afternoon by Barbara Spoor. Hi, Barbara.
Hello there, Mena.
Barbara is she is the head of complaints management at Esterase Chambers and Practice Management. Prior to joining Esterase, she had her own company, and prior to that had been with the Law Society, and she's been dealing with complaints management for many years. So she is the expert for this afternoon, just to talk people through the technology. People who are listening to this are in listen-only mode. They have got a questions panel, so if you want to ask either me or Barbara a question, you can type your question into the panel. No one else should be able to see the question, and when it comes to a convenient moment, I'll raise the question with Barbara and ask Barbara to answer it. At the end of the webinar, I'd be very grateful if you could complete the 3 questions which are the feedback, and if you have any other feedback, then please feel free to send us an email. So Barbara, thank you for joining us today. We're going to be looking at complaints, and I know it is probably a very obvious question, but what is a complaint?
Well, if I go to the legal ombudsman for their definition, because they are the people that the client can go to after you've looked at the complaint, their definition is any expression of dissatisfaction with service, which basically means it can be somebody saying to you, I'm unhappy with whatever aspect, or they don't even need to mention the word complaint. They just have to, you have to listen to them carefully to understand whether they are expressing, some kind of dissatisfaction with whatever service that you're providing them with. The client generally has to make the complaint, although they can nominate a third party to deal with the complaint for them, and there are limited abilities for residual beneficiaries, for example, to make a complaint. Now, Leah would look at their complaint if it could be deemed that you had provided a service or a consumer service to them. So in residual beneficiaries, then yes, they can make a complaint in a limited capacity. But basically, it's just, if somebody's saying I'm unhappy.
So interestingly, you and I had a conversation of about an hour a few weeks back where we were discussing whether something was or wasn't a complaint, because it was pretty obtuse, where somebody was saying, well, I don't really like the way that you have dealt with XYZ, but actually they weren't saying I am making a complaint. But looking into it deeper, the terminology of I don't like could be an expression of dissatisfaction with service, couldn't it?
It certainly could, yes, and it's certainly something that you need to be aware of and be clued up on. So when a client is saying something like that, that you're aware that it is a complaint, because obviously if you don't deal with it as a complaint, there may be ramifications later down the line, particularly if they go to the legal ombudsman who says, well, you've had a complaint come to you and haven't dealt with it, because obviously you're expected to do that, not only under the SRA's Code of Conduct, but certainly with regard to the legal ombudsman, who can impose fees upon you for not dealing with complaints adequately.
And we're going to look at those fees a little bit later on, aren't we?
Yeah, we are, yeah.
So in the next slide, we're talking about handling complaints correctly. I would have thought, again, this is pretty obvious, the way that somebody should handle a complaint, but I know from working for various firms that this is not obvious to some people.
No, it isn't, and I mean it often gets put to the bottom of the pile, because you're focused on the fee earning work, which naturally you would be if you're working for a firm. So you get somebody who expresses dissatisfaction, you might think, oh well, I'll deal with it tomorrow, I'll deal with it next week. But it's very important to handle it correctly, because it gives your client the confidence that you're customer focused, that you're interested in why they're upset with whatever service that you're providing, that you're giving them the time of day, that you're listening to them. By doing so, it can enhance, as I said on the slide there, it can enhance your reputation. Sorry. And it can go to the heart of recommendation. Obviously, as a business, you need to have clients come into your firm. They are the lifeblood of your business, and obviously they pay your fees and they keep your firm going. Now there was some
There was a survey or something about how many
survey
clients
there.
you
Yes,
lose.
that's right. And so 82% of people say that they would use a firm based on personal recommendation, which I think you will agree it's quite a high amount.
It is, yeah.
And, yeah. So you know, even if it's obviously you've got to give a good service or try and give a good service if you can. But what I've found in my experience is if you give the customer or the client complaint as much attention, even if you don't support the complaint, the client can go away happy and they're more likely to say, well, this firm actually took my complaint seriously,
Yeah.
and therefore they're willing to listen.
And it's interesting you said on that slide, Barbara, sorry to interrupt, but where you said that where people have had a good experience. Now that doesn't mean that their complaint was upheld. It just means the way that you dealt with the experience was a good experience. It can draw in 5 new clients, but if they've had a bad experience and you've dealt with it badly and you've delayed and been slow, and then maybe they didn't like the outcome, then it can lose you 23 clients.
That's right, yes. So I mean, it's important to keep the client as happy as you can. But if they do make a complaint, you've got to take it seriously. None of us like to have to complain about something and feel that you've just been fobbed off. It's exactly the same in the legal sector as anywhere else. You wouldn't want to go into a shop and say, I've been unhappy with this particular product, and somebody say, oh, I don't care about that, I don't want to listen to you. It's exactly the same in a legal space, that you've got to give that attention. And sometimes I think it gets overlooked, and it's quite important to deal with it correctly so that you do give it the attention it does deserve.
I'm sure many of the delegates have had that experience where they've been in a shop trying to complain about something, or even trying to get someone to pay attention to them, and where they can't, you leave that shop feeling as though you've had a bad experience, even though you might have bought what you wanted in the end. If the experience wasn't good, you might think twice about going back there next time, and that's something that we all need to bear in mind when we're dealing with our clients.
It is, yes, because obviously repeat business, if they're buying a new house, or and they might need you somewhere down the line, so they might turn to you and think, well, they're good, they're customer focused, they'll give me the attention I deserve. If I say something's incorrect, then they're going to attend to it. They're going to come back to you, so it can be a good tool to use, really.
So this is where we talk about the fees and how much the firms are going to lose. So the clients that you don't get, the new clients that you potentially lose out on, as we were talking about in the previous slide, it's a difficult thing to gauge, isn't it? But when you've got a complaint in your lap and you are obliged to deal with it, there are all these new, well, I say new fees, but they're certainly quite high fees, aren't they?
Yes. I mean, the legal ombudsman have a flat fee of £400, which arises as soon as they accept a complaint for investigation. Now, the flat fee of £400 goes to the legal ombudsman, but they can award compensation of anything up to £50,000. And I mean, generally, what I've found is that they will award compensation based upon distress or inconvenience caused. So it will be far less than £50,000, but it's always there in the background that if somebody can support an actual financial loss of up to £50,000, that Leo can award that. So it's quite important to get it right, because Leo can look at your complaints procedure as well, and if it doesn't do what it's supposed to do, then even if they don't substantiate the main context of the complaint, then they can still attract the flat fee of £400.
So who pays that flat fee, and when is it paid?
The solicitor pays it, and the solicitor pays it at the end of the investigation by the legal ombudsman.
So in 2 cases that you've just mentioned, that if on the second bullet point there, if Leo upholds the complaint, then the solicitor has to pay the £400 and then probably compensation as well. But
Yes,
even if Leo rejects the complaint, but then says your complaints procedure wasn't adequate, you could still end up paying the £400.
that's right. Yes, which is you know, it's quite an area that you need to concentrate on, really, if you think about it, because you might have done an excellent job and Leo might think, yeah, the service was absolutely brilliant, but you didn't handle the complaint so well. You delayed it, you took more than the allocated 8 weeks that they do give you to look at a complaint, or you just ignored the complaint for a long time, and you just didn't do it correctly. It was higgledy-piggledy and they didn't know where they were going, and you didn't, you know, satisfy them enough that they weren't told what was going to happen, and they may well say to you, well, you still need to pay this £400.
And what happens if they reject the complaint, your complaints procedure was fine? Does the client who made the complaint have to pay the £400?
No, the client never pays for
Okay.
any complaint procedure, either with the solicitor or with the legal ombudsman, so it's all the solicitor has to pay the £400. And clients are aware that this £400 fee arises because they do you know, their publications just do say this.
It's on the website, on the Leo website, isn't it?
Yes. So the clients will be aware that £400 will arise as a flat fee as soon as they accept it. Now, if they look at a complaint, on the other hand, and the service was of a reasonable level, which is what they look for, and your complaint is fine, then they will waive that £400 fee.
Okay.
So it's important that you get it right, that the complaint procedure is adequate and robust, and can stand up to scrutiny, basically.
So when you get to the end of a complaint, you're saying that the way that you've dealt with the complaint needs to be or should be a learning experience?
It should, yes, because I mean it can highlight all kinds of things, can't it? So, for example, if you've got a cost information complaint and it's substantiated, perhaps you might need to put in place some training about cost information and when it's adequate and when you need to revise that cost information and things like that. So it can give you the chance to learn from that. We're all human beings and we all learn from our mistakes. So if there is a mistake and you've addressed it in the course of a complaint, then you've learned from that, and it's something that you can put in hand for a later date. There might be a fear within your firm that there's a particular issue. It might keep coming up, and it might be something that you need to train them on moving forward, so that you're not getting the same complaints over and over again.
Yeah.
So that's why I think it's a learning experience. And it's also the opportunity really for your client to highlight something that's going wrong. It gives you an opportunity to put it all right, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the complaints procedure, we were just saying that if the complaints procedure within the firm isn't good enough, then Leo can still charge the flat fee. This is what the legal ombudsman expects, isn't it?
It is, yes. The legal ombudsman, you don't have to necessarily give your client a complaints procedure all the time, but you do need to have one in place so that if it's requested, then you have one in place. Now, you also need to ensure that it's adequate for all of your clients and that it's easy to understand and to follow, basically, because when you think about it, the client is a layperson. You might know your complaints procedure inside out, but look at it from another perspective. If you're a layperson, you're a client, and you've got some concerns, what do you do about it? And you know, the difference with a shop experience or a legal environment is that the client has no experience of, they've gone to you as a solicitor to be the expert. So, you know, they may well feel intimidated by it, and you need to make sure it's clear and it's understandable and there's not too many steps, so that they know who to go to, what they can do, and you should also make it so that they can phone you or email you or write to you so that every base is covered basically, so they can make a complaint in any manner that they wish to.
So where you've said at the third bullet point that account needs to be taken of a client who has special needs, for example, if the majority of your client base was, let's say, Polish, would you be obliged to provide the complaints procedure in Polish?
Well, it's a very good question. I mean, if it was, then I would probably say yes, because you know that that's going to be your client base, and so you need to make adjustments for somebody who, so that they have the same right to complain as anybody else, or at least, you know, if you are able to use interpretation or something of the complaint, so that they feel comfortable to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because I mean, lots of different firms have lots of niche areas, and it attracts certain types of clients, doesn't it? So you've got to look at your
Yeah.
client base and say, well, this is the complaints procedure in place, and our clients that we have now are going to be able to use that.
Yes, that's right.
So in terms of a point of contact, is it just one person within the firm that should be appointed a complaints manager?
Ideally, it should be one person, so that nothing slips through the net, so that they have all the information. Because if you have more than one person, then obviously they might deal with something, or they might think that you're dealing with something else, or it can get a bit confusing. So, and for the client as well, because if you've got one person that they need to contact, it's easy for them, isn't it? Because they can ring up and ask for Mr. Smith or Mrs. Smith, and they know that they're going to get put through to the person who deals with complaints.
And you've also said that if you haven't got a nominated contact, get somebody else involved at an early stage. What do you mean by getting somebody else involved?
Well, it can be a third party, such as you can make arrangements with another firm with a similar size in your area. So if they get a complaint, they can refer it to you.
And in fact, that's
And
what you do at Esterase, isn't it? Is that you are sometimes acting in the capacity as a third party, so that it's outsourced. It's a complaints procedure outsourcing to you. Is that right?
that's right, yes, and it gives you another option. So it's something that, you know, I deal with complaints for many firms, and they outsource their complaints to me, and it obviously gives you the objectivity, and you know, so it's an option for you, that you've got somebody who can deal with the complaint adequately, whilst you're fulfilling that obligation that you've got to deal with the complaint, but you're not expending any time on it, and you're obviously getting the outcome that you need. And if you do that, it's obviously a very good idea, because you've got somebody who's always there to deal with the complaints, and it's a good idea to have an objective view, I think, because obviously you can sometimes be a little bit defensive. Nobody likes to be criticised about the work that we've done. As I said before, we're all human beings, and we all like to think that we do a good job,
Yeah.
and most of the time we will. But things do go wrong, and we know that. So it gives you a fresh pair of eyes, if you like, to look at you know, what has or hasn't gone wrong, or what does or doesn't work.
I don't think I'd like to deal with people's complaints all day long, Barbara. I wouldn't like to have your job.
No, well, you know, each to their own. I quite enjoy it, and I like to be able to look into things and resolve things for people, whether that be, you know, I look at it and I don't think there's anything wrong with the service, or I look at it and there is something wrong with the service, and I can help them resolve things. So that's why I like it.
So the process then of dealing with a complaint, then whether you're dealing with it or whether you're giving advice to people in-house to deal with it, is again something very obvious. Listen to what the complaint is about.
Yeah, it's all too easy to think, I know what Mr. Bloggs is complaining about. But do you? Have you actually looked at what he said? Have you spoken to him about it? Have you fed back to him and said, this is what I think you're saying, is it right? Because it's all too easy to just think you know what the problem is. You've got to really actively listen to what that complaint is about. There might be some underlying complaint. You know, for example, my costs are too high. But have you given adequate, and you might say, well, I've given adequate cost information, so how can the costs be too high? He knows exactly what they're about. what is it that's making him say that? So you really need to get to the crux of what the complaint is and listen to what the client says, not just what you think he or she is saying.
And this is where I think, being a fee earner, you know, Mrs. Bloggs phones up and your heart sinks and you think, oh, she's going to complain again, because Mrs.
Yeah.
Bloggs is always complaining. I think that sometimes you can wear out of patience as a fee earner, because you're dealing with, you know, sometimes complicated emotional work, and you've got a very unhappy client, and sometimes it's all too easy to brush legitimate complaints under the carpet because you're busy doing other things and you're doing the best that you can in the circumstances. So maybe getting somebody else to deal with it, a third party within the firm, so somebody else taking the file, a complaints manager or a complaints handler like yourself, takes that extra bit of pressure off, gives the client a fresh pair of eyes, as you say, and somebody to listen and maybe get to the bottom of what is this really about. So
Yeah.
listening is a difficult skill to learn, actually, and solicitors like to think that we are good at doing it, because quite often that's what we're doing most of the day, but it's really listening to what's not being said as well as what is being said.
That's perfectly correct. You need to really listen to what the client is saying. As I said before, as a solicitor, you're an expert. That's what a client goes to you for, your expertise. And yes, you have time constraints and you have lots of clients that they all want everything done tomorrow, you know, or today even. So you need to, you need to take time to listen to what your client is actually saying to you, because it can have repercussions if you don't listen to them in the first instance.
And again, on this side, you've said it's important to make necessary adjustments for the needs of the clients. And again, that could be client's disability, so if a client's deaf or blind or in a wheelchair, or if they don't speak English very well, and all at the cost of the firm. Is that right?
It is, yes, and it's, you know, I know it sounds a little bit harsh, but it's part of, you don't expect to go into a supermarket and pay for the complaint, do you? So
No.
you go and you say, this product's awful, I don't want it, it doesn't taste nice. You don't expect them to say, well, I'm going to look at that, but I'm going to charge you for it. So it's exactly the same, although obviously in a legal forum, it's your fee earning time is probably more than going into a supermarket and buying product. I understand that, but you're obliged to do this, and with your regulator, you're obliged to have a complaints procedure, and you are obliged to deal with it. So that you can't get away from it. So that's why it's important to have a robust complaints procedure, or as you say, make other arrangements, outsource things, or speak to another firm and perhaps have an objective view. Then at least you know that you're doing what you're meant to do, and your complaints are being handled correctly.
So once we've done the listening, then you've got to get to the bottom of what the complaint is about, so understanding.
Yes, that's it. And I mean, it's do you know a complaint? It comes back to the point we were making before. Do you know a complaint is being made? So, you know, is Mr. and Mrs. Blogg saying my costs are too high, my case is taking too long? You know exactly what's going to happen in that case, because you're the solicitor, you're moving it forward. Is the client just confused? Does their case just take too long? So if so, explain to them, well, you know, you think it's taking too long, but we've got to go through A, B, C, D, E, and F to get to where you want to be, to achieve your goal. And sometimes that helps, just to explain to the client, this is where we're at, and it might help, and it might take away that complaint or the potential for a complaint, and the softer cues of my costs are too high. Is there really something else behind that? Perhaps they think the costs are too high because they're not getting anywhere, or they think they're not getting anywhere. And then it comes back down to, have you updated your client? And it's all interlinked, so it's about providing a good level of service. And if you do that, it should alleviate some of the issues of complaints that do arise. Are there some adjustments you can make to help the client make the complaint? Do they want to have a meeting with you, for example? Yes, it's all your time. Again, you know, we're coming back to perhaps outsourcing something so you're not expending too much time on it. because you're trying to solve it, obviously. But can you do something like that? Is there something that you need to do to help them make the complaint? You know, talking through with them, just have a chat with them, and sometimes I think that goes by the wayside because they get a little bit scared of what's going to happen.
So then in terms of understanding, it's also important to ask the client what they think is going to help to resolve the complaint.
That's right, yeah.
Because they've often got something in mind, haven't they?
Sometimes they do have. Sometimes, you know, you will get, you know, from my experience, you'll get a letter of complaint and they'll say, I'm very unhappy with this, this and this. But they won't tell you what they want to resolve it. And I personally always ask the client what they want to resolve it. Or you'll get a client who says, I want all my fees back because I don't think you did a good enough job. Now, generally, you know, if you've been working for the money and there's some value to it, then you're not going to, you know, refund the client the whole of the fee. So that's what my next point was, is this possible? And sometimes it might be extraordinary. You know, if your client says, well, I want to go back to the beginning and I don't want to do that anymore. Well, unfortunately, it hasn't happened. You can't do that.
Yeah, you can't undo things that have already been done. But if what they're saying is monetary based, you know, can I have £500 credit, then, you know, bearing in mind the potential outcome of £400 as the flat fee, you might be minded to take a view on that.
You could do, yes, but I mean, it's then a matter of if you feel that you've provided a reasonable level of service, there's no reason why you should pay a client just because of the hassle factor, if you like. Because you need to know if there is something going wrong. So if you have a look at the complaints that they've made, and if there isn't anything going wrong, then why pay for that? If there is, then yes, address it. And if the client has said, yes, I want £500 as a credit, and you think that's reasonable, then by all means do it. But, you know, it varies from complaint to complaint, obviously. But ask the client, engage them, you know, get them engaged with the complaint, because then it gives them the feeling that you're listening to them, that you understand what they're saying to you, and you're going to help it.
So then, in terms of informing the client, what do we mean by inform?
Informing them is that you acknowledge that the complaint is there.
Yeah.
I always, when I'm dealing with a complaint, I'll always acknowledge the effort that the client has made to raise the complaint. Yes, when you get a complaint in, naturally everybody's going to be, well, they've got nothing to complain about because I've done a really good job for them and I've got the outcome they've wanted. But it's taken the client some guts to get up to sort of say to you, I've got a complaint about this service.
Yeah.
And some clients will say to me, I really like this solicitor, but the service hasn't been of a very good level. So I always acknowledge that the client has taken that time to either write or speak with me and given me the opportunity to address the concerns, because if you can address the concerns and potentially stop them going to the legal ombudsman, then it's beneficial for you as well.
Barbara, it might be not so. You might not be able to answer this question specifically, but somebody has said, how much does Esterase charge for dealing with complaints on an external basis? Is it an hourly rate? Is it a fixed fee?
It can be either. It's very much dependent upon the firm and what they want and what kind of service they provide. Mena, if you would like to give me that person's details, I can obviously contact them afterwards and give them some further information about the charging structure that we have.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. I guess what people want to do is to figure out whether or not it's more cost effective, and certainly, you know, the hassle factor, as you said, to get somebody who's experienced to deal with a complaint rather than deal with it yourself, because it's hard for, as you're saying, it's hard for a client to make a complaint. And once I did somebody's divorce many years ago, and it so happened that I then became friendly with their niece or someone, and their niece said to me, oh, my aunt didn't like you very much when you did her divorce because she felt that you were really pushy. And you think, well, actually years ago, if she had said that to me, A, how would I have reacted, and B, why didn't she say that to me?
Yeah.
And you know, what were the circumstances that she was feeling? And because I'm a family practitioner, I think people do feel as though they're being pushed because it's a bit of a distressed purchase, particularly if they're the one that doesn't want to get divorced. It can be really difficult for them to deal with, but it is difficult to accept a complaint. But I think that as a practitioner, it does help you to grow and rectify things that perhaps you think are going wrong, and had someone not pointed it out to you, you wouldn't have necessarily have realised that.
Yeah, and you know, we all learn from our experiences, don't we? And obviously, you know, family law is a very distressing time for some people, as you say. And you know, it's about balancing, because you need to take into account what your client is like. You might have somebody who's very aggressive and wants to push ahead and stuff, and you might have someone who's very fearful and fearful for the future, or what have you. So it's about balancing, really, in relation to clients. And in relation to complaints, I think clients like to feel that they're being listened to and you're being attentive.
And they know
And
where they are, so they know who
yeah,
you are, as you say, who's dealing with it, how long is it going to take, when are you available to speak to, because it doesn't necessarily all need to be dealt with by letter. If the client wants to have a chat on the phone, then it's important that, as you say, you make necessary adjustments to do things the way that they want to do them. This isn't
yeah,
20 years ago when they wrote a letter and you wrote a letter back to them, and then they wrote a letter to you and that was the end of it. If they want to have a Skype meeting, you could have a Skype meeting about it.
you could certainly, yes, definitely. That's something that you know, I've done. I talk to people on the phone. I've had face-to-face meetings with clients to discuss their concerns. Some people like to do it like that. Some people just like to email. Someone, you know, like to write. So it's all about what they want, and you should ask them how they want. I always, when I contact someone, say, is it okay for me to email you? Is it okay for me to speak to you? When are you available? Because obviously your client will be at work at some point.
Sure.
You need to know when they're going to be available. I had a chap recently who worked night shift, so I couldn't ring him between certain times because he obviously went to bed. And so I had to ensure that I didn't speak to him or ring him during the period when he was going to be in bed.
Yeah, that's
And
really
it's
important.
that kind of thing that's important, isn't it?
And feeding back, as you've said at the end of this, feeding back to the client, you know, what you think the problem is, so that if you've got the wrong end of the stick, they can say, oh no, that's not right.
Absolutely, yeah.
So moving on to the second slide of inform, engaging the client in the process, and this
Yeah.
is this is what we were saying a moment ago, isn't it?
Yes, it was actually, yes. So engaging them in the process, it just, you know, it gives them confidence, and as I said, to iron out any misunderstandings. It might be that they just wanted to have a little bit of a grumble, but they don't actually want to make a formal complaint. I've had people do that to me before, where it looks like it's a complaint, and I've, you know, tracked it as such. And then I've had a chat with the chap, and he said, well, actually, I just wanted to tell someone, and I don't want to take it any further.
Which is
Well, that's
fine.
great.
And that's
So
the listening to them and feeding back, and then they realise that that's all they wanted was a grumble, and that's
yeah,
it. They've had their grumble, and
yeah,
if it's
and
more than just a bit
again,
of a
sorry,
if it's more than just a bit of a grumble, it's then going through the full procedure, isn't it?
yeah, it is, yes. Um, you know, again, I've mentioned the point of asking them what they would like to resolve the complaint, because that's quite important, and managing their expectations at that point as well, about what you are able to do to resolve a complaint. Or, you know, because some people will say, I want to move fee earners. Now, somebody says that to me and it's a small firm and there's 2 or 3 fee earners, I'll always make that request as a firm. But if that's not possible, obviously I point that out to them very quickly, so that I've managed that they're not going to, if I'm dealing with a formal complaint and I've gone through 8 weeks worth of formal complaint, and at the end of the day all they want to do is change fee earner, and I can't do that because the other 2 fee earners perhaps haven't got the capacity to do it or haven't got the expertise to do it, then it's something that you need to jump on quite quickly. So manage that expectation quite well.
And it's interesting, and it's just occurred to me that I know somebody not in the legal industry who was complaining about something, and in fact, what they were saying is, here's the complaint and here's the solution. I would like to move, as you say, not fee earners in that case, it was something else, but I'd like to move so that I'm dealing with someone else because I don't want to deal with you for all of these reasons. And then that
Yeah,
person came back and said, oh well, what you're complaining about isn't valid, and you're just complaining about something else, and I don't accept your complaint. And ultimately it creates a lot of bad feeling, doesn't it, if A,
it
you've
does.
got unrealistic expectations, or B, you act defensively, because it ruins a good relationship.
It does, yes. And as I've mentioned before, um, none of us like to be criticised for our work, but it's easy to get defensive and say, I've done a really great job for you, but you have to look at what the client said. There must be a reason behind it, and yes, sometimes it will be just something that is they've just done it for vindictiveness, perhaps. But on most occasions they have valid complaints that they want addressed, and in my experience, if you address them correctly, even if you don't support them, the client is grateful for that. And I often get people who say, I'm very, I can see that you put the work into it, you've looked into it thoroughly, and I'm grateful for that, and
and
let's move on.
and that's the difference between process, which is what we've been talking about, and outcome. If you process a complaint appropriately and in a timely manner, and you're not defensive, even if the outcome isn't great, people have confidence in the process that you've engaged in.
Absolutely, yeah.
So then what to do next if it's somebody in-house dealing with this and they don't have that many complaints, what are they going to do once they've listened to the complaint and told the client all the next steps that are going to happen?
Yeah. Well, you need to set some time aside, really, to review the file, to see what the, against what the client's saying, what is actually on that file that shows me either there is or there isn't some good food.
And that's
Um,
against busy fee earners. So what you're saying is, don't take 10 minutes to flick through the file. You need to set proper time aside for this.
Absolutely, and if you're going to have to say, well, I need to address this, and I've got some time next week on Wednesday, put it in your diary, and make sure that you've got a block of time that you can have a look at it, so you're ready and you're getting yourself ready to look at the content. You talk to the fee earner involved, if it's a larger firm, so it's not a one-man band. Talk to the fee earner involved. Why do they think there's a complaint? There might be a clash of personalities. That happens, you can get people who just don't get along. So it could be that. It could be that the fee earner might come up to you and say, well, Mrs. Bloggs rang me 10 times last week and I didn't get a chance to ring her back. I was too busy, I was in court all week, or what have you.
Yeah.
Why do they think there's a complaint coming? And it gives you a little bit of an insight into what the fee earner thinks the complaint is in comparison to what the client is saying. It gives you a better understanding. Is there anyone else within the firm that you need to speak to? Perhaps a secretary, I was saying that they've left numerous messages, and has she not passed them on? Has she passed them on? Is there some communication, breakdown there?
Yeah.
And if you're speaking to the fee earner, what view do they have? Do they think there's some poor service? Because sometimes you know that a file's gone badly, and you say, yeah, absolutely, hands up, I've done something wrong, I've delayed it, I haven't followed the instructions or whatever. So do they think there's going to be some merit in it, basically? And it gives you a better grasp of what's gone on behind the scenes, rather than just coming straight in from a client point of view and accepting everything they're saying. But, you do need to have time to do this as well.
And then you need to then get the file, review the file, so you've set your
Yeah.
time aside to do that, and
Yeah.
then try and figure out what's gone on.
Exactly, yes. And sometimes you can have complaints of delay, and you will look at the file and there's evidence to support that there is some delay there, perhaps. And then that's what you need to review the file for. You can form your own view then, rather than just speak to somebody else, because that's what you're doing, and you're forming your own view of the complaint that the client has made, so that you've addressed it adequately. So we're coming back to the Leo stance. Leo wants you to look at a complaint adequately, and they need you to give you sufficient time.
And so then you should be in a position to respond. And it's interesting that the first thing you say here is don't be afraid to say sorry, because I think that's something that a lot of solicitors will feel reticent to do, because they might see that as a acknowledgement that they're wrong.
Yes, that's right. But I do think if you think of your own personal experiences, if somebody says to you, sorry, you go into a shop, I'm really sorry to hear that you've had to bring that product back to us. And it takes a bit of your anger away, I think, if you're angry about having to go back and take a product back or something. And it's exactly the same. I'm sorry that you've had to make the complaint, but I'll do all I can to try and resolve it. It's something that I do when I'm addressing complaints. I always say, I am sorry to hear that you've got some concerns about the service that you received. I'm not saying that that I'm saying sorry because the service hasn't been of a reasonable level at that point, but I'm saying sorry that you've had to do it, even if I don't think there's any poor service. It doesn't mean that you're acknowledging you're in the wrong, and certainly something that I've been to when I went to the legal ombudsman. They do give some guidance in relation to how they handle complaints. They encourage you to say sorry, and they don't see it as an admission of I'm acknowledging that the service has been poor.
That's interesting. So then you need to address whether there has been poor service or address the issue, and can you do what the client has asked you to do? Otherwise, you're going to have to do something else, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, it's like the example you gave before, when you were saying if the client wants £500 credit onto their account. Perhaps you look at the file and you think there has been some poor service, but you don't think it merits a £500 credit. Perhaps you could suggest, well, look, I'll give you £300 credit, and can we resolve it on that basis? So that's what I'm talking about then. But it shows that you're willing to address the concerns, and that if the file does highlight there are concerns, or they are genuine concerns that have merit, that you're willing to address it.
And of course, there's always the possibility that you've looked at the file and you've spoken to the fee earners and you don't think there's been any poor service and the client's just complaining without foundation.
Exactly, yes. And if there isn't any foundation to the complaint, then set out fully the reasons why, relying on the evidence in the file. So if it's, for example, it's cost information again, you were given the client care letter at the outset, the estimate was revised in an email of the 10th of February, and the estimate was revised again, and all the bills are within the estimate, then it doesn't support the complaint. And you need to tell the client why it doesn't support the complaint, because then they'll understand. And as I said at the outset, a lot of clients will feel that you've given it the attention, you've looked at it thoroughly, and they're happy because you've done that, albeit you haven't supported it. I have had clients say to me, thank you, because you've done a good job. You've looked at it thoroughly, and I now understand the position. And that's what we're trying to get to, really.
But at this point, there is a danger, isn't there, that you will come across as being at best defensive and at worst aggressive?
I think it's how you say it to them. If you set it out factually and you simply stick to the points of, this happened and this happened and this happened, but I understand that you may have further comments to say, so do you want to come back and say anything else to me? Is there something I've missed? Give them an opportunity to engage them again. You're not being aggressive, you're just telling them what's happened, and this is how you've done it. And they will see from your response that you've taken the time to review the file, because you're referring to the file, you're referring to the evidence within the file. So really they've taken an interest in that, and they've done all they can. And you're giving them an opportunity. You're not just saying, that's it, blank. Give them an opportunity to come back. Is there anything further? Do you want to say anything else to me?
And so finally, if it doesn't work and you're not able to resolve matters in that
Mhm.
way, what happens next?
Well, you have to, if you're not able to resolve it one way or the other, you have to give the client the legal ombudsman's details at the end so they can refer to the legal ombudsman. In addition, now, as of the 1st of October of this year, you also have to give the ADR provider's details as well, and you also have to say whether you're going to submit to ADR or not. Just for clarification on that one, Mena, you don't have to submit to ADR, but you do have to give a provider's details, and obviously we've provided the link there so that you can see that they are the approved bodies, so you must pick one of those from the approved bodies and give the client those details. Once you've given the details, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, one of the things that I thought was weird is that the client can choose both options, can't they? The client can say, I want to go to Leo and ADR.
Yes, they can. Yes, they're perfectly entitled to do both. But at the moment, you don't have to submit to going to ADR. You just have to provide the details. But make it clear on a closure letter, when you close the file, is when you give these details. So you give Leo's details, you give the ADR provider's details, but you say whether you're willing to go to ADR or not. This may all change in the future, obviously, with regards to Leo, who are doing a consultation at the moment in relation to becoming an ADR provider. As you will be aware, they withdrew their application earlier this year.
Yeah.
And have a consultation ongoing at the moment. So that'll be different, I think, in the future. But at the moment, that's what you need to do. You need to ensure that you do that because so you're compliant with the EU directive.
Lovely, thank you. I thought this was really interesting when I looked at the slides that you prepared, Barbara, because as a family lawyer, I didn't know that we've got the highest rate of complaints of any area of law.
Yes, you have. And I think I know we've discussed this in the past, but I think it's really because of the emotion in that subject.
Yeah.
Some people just don't want to get divorced. Some people do, but they're very aggressive. And nobody goes into getting a divorce and gets everything they absolutely want, because you can't possibly get everything you absolutely want.
And you don't do it lightly either. And a lot, half of the people getting divorced, for them, it's a distress purchase because half of the people usually don't want to get divorced. So they start off the process quite unhappy, and then the next highest peak is there for residential conveyancing, wills and probate, and interestingly, commercial conveyancing as compared to residential conveyancing, it's really low rates of complaint. So it's not the property transaction; it's your ability to process how it works, I think.
I think it is. I think you're right. And obviously, as everyone knows, moving house is one of the most stressful things you can do.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it comes from with residential conveyancing. And I don't think, as a layperson, you know all the processes. And sometimes I think it's about, not having sufficient information as a client so that you know what's happening, so you understand what's happening, so you're not getting distressed as much. And that's why I think residential conveyancing comes into it. With commercial conveyancing, I think it's a matter of you have commercial clients who have more experience than a residential conveyancing matter.
It's so personal, isn't it? Moving house and making sure that everything goes well and according to your timescale. I'm also quite surprised at how low the complaints about criminal lawyers are. And I'm not suggesting by saying that I think criminal lawyers are in any way worse than family lawyers, but I would have thought criminals who are in a position where they are potentially going to prison potentially would have more complaints, but it doesn't look like that's borne out by the statistics.
Yeah, and certainly from my experience when I worked at the Law Society, we didn't have an awful lot of criminal complaints. I really can't explain that. I have the same view as you. Potentially it should be higher because of the circumstances, but it just isn't. It's one of those things, isn't it, really?
Yeah, I'd really be interested to know if we could ever find out the answer to that one, actually.
Oh, we'll have to try.
And then this one is about what the complaints were about. So for the same years, what are
Yeah.
people complaining about? And the top two there are number one, failure to advise, and number
Mm,
two, failure to follow instructions.
mm. I think the fair to advise one is really about keeping your client informed about what's happening, or sometimes it can be that the client goes in and gives you a set of circumstances and you don't fully advise them of all of the options available to them. So, you know, as you will be well aware, there may well be several avenues that you can go down, and it's about, you know, giving the client options, so you can do this, this or this, or you can do this, if there are options, obviously.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, you just need to make sure that you advise the client adequately about what their options are. And it may be limited, but it's an important fact. Obviously, as borne out by the statistics from Leo, that you need to advise clients adequately and make sure that they know what's happening and what they can and can't do. So again, coming back to managing expectations when you're dealing with it.
And the next slide looks at the Leo data regarding their remedies and what they are most likely
Yeah.
to do.
Yeah. And I mean, you can see that no remedy is quite high, where they'll come in and they'll just look at, they'll think that there's no poor service, but equally, compensation for emotional impact is just as high.
Yeah.
So, you know, in 50% of the cases, in that case, you're going to get some compensation, and of course, it comes down to the solicitor to pay that compensation. And as we said at the outset, that compensation is also on top of the flat fee, so it can be quite costly if you don't address it. But what I would say is, if you are dealing with a complaint and you do see something in the file that illustrates that you provide report service, you do try and resolve it with the client, because Leo will always look at that resolution, and if they think that resolution is reasonable, they will wipe out the flat fee anyway.
Okay.
And then you will not have the obligation of the £400 flat fee. Obviously, we didn't mention, and that's probably my fault with the slide, is that they publish data as well about complaints. So interestingly, if you go to the legal ombudsman and the first port of call is the investigator, if they decide that the complaint is substantiated, for example, but the client doesn't like what the investigator says, so for example, you know, I think it's substantiated and you should get £100 compensation, the client can always go to the ombudsman and get an ombudsman's decision, and those decisions are published, and they remain published for a year about your firm. So
So there are
conjuncture
various things that someone needs to think about when it comes to going to Leo: the financial cost, the implications, the time it's going to take, and the likelihood is, looking at this data, that 50% of the time, as you say, you know, there's likely to be some remedy. It's interesting there that Leo can impose a remedy of apology. Is that
Yeah,
is that separate to compensation, or would it be hand in hand with compensation?
it can simply be an apology. It
Okay.
can stand alone apology, as well as going hand in hand. So sometimes a solicitor will be asked to apologise but make a compensatory payment as well. But usually an apology will be a standalone remedy.
And I didn't know that Leo could impose a remedy of paying someone else to complete the work. That
Yes,
has to be the ultimate punishment to a solicitor. You've done a
it,
terrible job. Now you've got to pay for
I think
somebody
it
else to
must
do
be a
it.
terrible. If that is imposed on a solicitor, I think that would be awful. I think it must be one of the worst things that can happen, that you're deemed not to have or be able to produce that work, and you have to pay somebody else to finish it off for you. But they can do it, and they do it.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
as the statistics show, they do that.
Thank you very much, Barbara, for joining us today for this webinar. I've just put Barbara's details on this slide. So if you've got any questions for her, you can contact her directly. Her email address and telephone number are there. If you are claiming CPD for this webinar, you will get 1 hour for your CPD, as it's the last day of the CPD year. My details are there, and you can contact me if you've got any questions about today's webinar, or anything that you think would be helpful going into the future. When I draw the webinar to a close, you will get a opportunity to complete 3 questions for a feedback questionnaire. If you would do that, I would be very grateful. And I'll finish off this Friday afternoon, Barbara, by thanking you once again for joining us. It's been really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks to everybody who has joined us today, and hopefully you'll join us again in the near future for one of our webinars. Thanks very much, everybody. Goodbye.